how Mexico's epidemic of murdered journalists is an ominous warning to the press everywhere. Over, and this is by Chris Hedges, I should say. And then there's an accompanying video. So this article, I should have said this earlier. This article is by Chris Hedges. He works over or works with, I don't know the partnership or how the dynamic is. So I'll just say works with those over at the Real News Network. And he wrote this article, and there's an accompanying clip that he made. This was just put out a couple of days ago on the 24th. But let's read. How Mexico's epidemic of murdered journalists is an ominous warning to the press everywhere. Over 150 journalists have been assassinated in Mexico since 2020. Behind the killing is a nexus of corruption and violence that links organized crime, police, and government. By Chris Hedges on the 24th of this month. Journalists lay out credentials. Oh, sorry, let me make sure I'm here. Journalists lay out the credentials of their murdered colleagues during a demonstration after the Mexican journalist Javier Valdez murder at the Attorney General's office at Jalisco on May 16, 2017 in Guadalajara, Mexico. Leonardo Alvarez Latin Contes via. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading the shout out for the picture. My bad. So we'll watch this video in just a second, but just to read a little bit more on this article before we watch the video. Over 100,000 people have been disappeared in the course of the destructive drug war waged in Mexico over the past 2 decades. Among the deceased are more than 150 journalists murdered for their work to expose the dense network of corruption and violence that links government officials, police, and the military with organized crime. The case of Regina Martinez, an investigative journalist assassinated in her home in the state of Veracruz in 2012, is emblematic of this war being waged against the press. Catherine Corroren, former Associate Press Bureau Chief of Mexico and Central America, joins the Chris Hedges report to discuss her book on the case of Regina Martinez and the wider context of killings of journalists in Mexico. In the Mouth of the Wolf, I guess that's the name of the article. I'm sorry, of the book. And the transcript is here. I guess we can. No, we don't have to. We don't have to go like that. So let's watch. Now she does have a heavy accent, but I think it's or at least I can understand it. So let's listen, or let's watch, I should say. And of course, we're not going to be watching all of it. It's a 30-minute interview, and of course, we want you to go over and watch the full thing over at the Real.
Now you talk about terror.
On April 28, 2012, an intruder broke through the metal door leading into the garden patio of the investigative reporter Regina Martinez. He apparently surprised the Mexican journalist in her bathroom where her body was discovered. The diminutive reporter, barely 5 feet tall, tried to fight off her attacker. Skin was found under her fingernails. Her jaw was broken with brass knuckles. A rag was wrapped around her neck. She was apparently suffocated to death. She was one of 150 journalists murdered in Mexico since 2000. These reporters, poorly paid, often working for local online publications, courageously exposed the collaboration between government officials, the police, and the powerful drug cartels. Martinez, who was killed at age 48, was working on an investigation into the corruption of 2 successive governors, Fidel Herrera and Javier Duarte, in her home state of Veracruz, considered the most dangerous place in the world to report. In Veracruz, drug traffickers and their accomplices have executed hundreds of people, including teenage dealers, families, farmers, and politicians. even young women who attended their sex parties. Many of these bodies ended up in unmarked mass graves. Martinez refused bribes and ignored threats. Unable to be bought off or intimidated, she, like many other Mexican journalists, was murdered. The current Mexican president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, has asked that the homicide case be re-examined. Catherine Corcoran, the former Associated Press bureau chief in Mexico, in her book, In the Mouth of the Wolf, A Murder, a Cover-Up, and the True Cost of Silencing the Press, uses the case of Martinez to look at a country where in many towns and cities there is no separation between government, the police, the military, and organized crime. She chronicles what happened.
Yeah, that's called, I mean, that's like a step past fascism because, and it'll kind of get into it, but, you know, there's allegations of actually elected officials wanting the deaths of journalists. I'm not going to use the word ordering, but like wanting or instigating or hoping. And I'll let them more explain in the video here. So let's see that.
What happens when the path of fake news and obfuscation, something that not only plagues Mexico but the United States, takes its natural course. Joining me to discuss her book, In the Mouth of the Wolf, A Murder, a Cover-Up, and the True Cost of Silencing the Press is Catherine Corcoran. So you begin the book with a death threat that you receive in the AP Bureau, and that is an escalation. And you chart that kind of process of intimidation and threats that begin at the local level and work the way up the chain, and how that functions. Can you explain that?
Yes, and first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here to talk about this. Initially, yes, the hits against journalists, they started maybe in the late 90s, but they really were growing in the years when I arrived in Mexico in 2008. It was 6 or 7 people a year. The year I became bureau chief, 10 people. And for the most part, initially, they were local reporters, and they were working in conflict areas, the borders, basically, where obviously there's the important routes for trafficking. And so it was an issue, a problem that a lot of people ignored, even among journalists, especially in Mexico City. They kind of looked at it like, well, that's another world. And some of those people aren't journalists anyway. There was definitely a lot of criticism within the journalist ranks about who was a journalist and who wasn't. There wasn't a lot of uniform ethics or standards in how people were doing their jobs. And it was known that a lot of, especially journalists in smaller markets, were being paid by various sources to write good news, or were under the employ of someone. And so it was something that started off as, you know, it was happening. The government dismissed it, said these journalists were corrupt, and that's why they got in trouble. And there was not a lot to do because there were never investigations. We really didn't know. And so people just started to parrot the government story, which is, oh, they're not journalists. And they would say that. The president's office specifically called me on one case and said, they're not journalists, Kathy. They're not like you. They were basically saying, you know, American or foreign journalists coming into Mexico and the way we do journalism, the way these people were operating was very different. And so I was suspicious initially because they were so insistent about it. And but then, as you said, it escalated. I think the threat that we received at the Associated Press, we were never able to confirm whether it was a real threat or a hoax. But if it was real, we saw it as kind of a trial balloon to see how an international organization would react, because mostly they left us alone because we made a lot of noise, and they wanted to do these things without making too much noise. And so we never really found the origin of what that threat was. But then in 2012, when Regina was murdered, it was a very clear message for everyone, because, first of all, they didn't hit national correspondents either up to that point. There were sort of these unwritten rules, as you know, when you're operating in a country with a lot of corruption. You never operate on those assumptions, but there are a certain set of unspoken rules about who they go after and who they don't. Well, when they killed a national correspondent for Proceso magazine, that was a whole other level. And everyone saw it that way. And for all of us, we saw that was an attempt to silence a journalist that had nothing to do with her situation. She was beyond reproach. And it was a clear message that they were out to silence independent journalists.
Although you set the stage with the
So that's kind of like all I want to do with this one, and just set the stage, because I have a lot of receipts on this particular topic. So she kind of sets more of a historical stage. One of the journalists that was murdered in 2012. We showed her picture at the beginning of the clip. But now let's go to more news that's happening recently. Excuse me. Let's put this in the view here. Is this the right one? Hold on a second, everybody. No, hang on a second. Oh, it opened in a different box. Oh, there we go. All right, so this one is coming from Mexican Daily Post, and they actually have video of two current journalists. And okay, Mexican Daily Post. Okay, finally, I got the right frame. Missing Mexican journalists appear in a video in chains. So this is from Mexico Daily Post, and I'll show you the video in just a second. But yeah, let me show you a couple of receipts for this topic here. So. Media rights activists voiced concern on Wednesday for 3 Mexican journalists feared to have been abducted 2 weeks ago in an area controlled by drug traffickers. Jesus Pintor and Fernando, I'll just go by their first names, and Alan, who work for the news website in Sereno, Calitano, disappeared on December 27th. Now, these are the ones that are saying these are the people. But in a video posted by unknown persons on social media, 2 of the missing journalists appeared chained hand and foot. One of the journalists saying that paying the consequences for their reporting in the violent southern region. Wow, this
En otros temas, periodistas de Guerrero exigen al gobierno federal la aparición con vida.
So this is obviously in Spanish, but we're waiting to see the actual footage of them right here. Let me fast forward a little bit here.
Bueno, Villegas. Yo soy Alan García Aguilar. Nosotros somos parte del equipo de Escenario Calentano. Estamos aquí pagando las consecuencias de las publicaciones que se realizaban en contra de estas personas y diferentes personas de la región de Tierra Caliente del Estado de México, Michoacán y Guerrero. El Escenario Calentano se creó hace 5 años. Yo fui el que creó la página hace 5 años.
Qué terrible que...
Wow. So now there's an accompanying article with this, not just this one. I have another article, but let's read a little more about the video. The area where the journalists were missing is very difficult, very complex, controlled almost 100% by the Familia Muchoacán, drug cartel, Reporters Without Borders representative Balbina Flores told AFP. And again, this is in a different language, but you can see these first two, the two on the left, those are the ones that were in that video. So let me bring up another article that I have here. I believe this is the one that talks about these gentlemen here. Yeah, this one right here. So let's go a little bit more in detail with this particular one. So this one is from cpj.org, and it's a committee to protect journalists. So as you that's the same guy that was in the video, and here is some of what the write-up is on this. Mexican journalist Alan Garcia's whereabouts unknown after December abduction. Mexico City, February 6, 2023. Mexican authorities must conduct a swift and thorough investigation into the abduction of two journalists and a media worker in the southern state of Guerrero, and account for the whereabouts of missing journalist Alan Garcia Aguilar, the Committee to Protect Journalists said Monday. A criminal gang in the Guerrero town of Arcelia abducted Garcia along with journalist Jesus Pintor and media worker Fernando Moreno in late December, according to news reports. On January 7th, Garcia, the founder and editor of Facebook-based news outlet Incenario, there you go, and Moreno, an administrator at the outlet, were seen in chains in a video published by the outlet. In the video, Moreno said that they were facing, quote, facing the consequences for what we said about people from the Tierra Caliente region, where Excenario Caliento is based. The outlet's Facebook page is viewable in Mexico, but not from the United States. That's interesting. It's viewable from Mexico, but not, it's blocked from Americans from seeing that. There's tons of article. I won't go through each of them. Like I literally have like 5 more because this has been going on. Click on this one here and see what this is. This is corporate media covering the same thing. This is more, I guess, of an independent or at least international. This is CBS covering it. Two of three abducted Mexican journalists are freed after hostage video posted online. So I wonder if this is the update of the 2. Yes, it looks like it is. So let's read. The journalists abducted in a drug cartel stronghold in southern Mexico have been freed, but the whereabouts of a third is unknown, authorities said Thursday. Security forces located Jesus Pintor and Fernando Moreno. Those are the 2 that were mentioned, but Alan doesn't look like Alan is the third that is still missing. In good health, more than 2 weeks after they disappeared, the Guerrero State Prosecutor's Office said a rescue operation involving the military and National Guard was believed to have led the abductors to release the men, a statement said. So that's a general update on these. Jeez, this is oh man, and here's another headline I'll put up here. And I know that popped up, I saw it, but I'm going to another headline. This is another, this one is from Transcontinental Times. A Mexican journalist shot dead a day after publishing a story. What's happening over in Mexico? So I'll read a little bit. Herbert Lopez Vasquez was one of 13 Mexican journalists who were killed in 2022. Oh man, let's see if I can blow this up. That's why it's so hard for me to write. But let's read some more. On February 10th, shortly after dusk, two men drove up to Herbert Lopez Vasquez tiny radio station in southern Mexico in a white Dodge Ram pickup. One of the men got out, went inside the station, and shot the 42-year-old journalist. According to Lopez's brother, the other person with him was his 12-year-old son, Oscar, who hid with the journalist who was murdered. Lopez was one of 13 Mexican journalists who were killed in 2022, as per the Committee to Protect Journalists, a New York-based rights organization. And that's an article we've already read. They're kind of referencing that organization. It was the bloodiest year on record for journalists in Mexico, which is currently the most dangerous nation in the world for journalists outside the crisis in Ukraine, where CPJ reports 15 journalists were slain last year. So why was he slain? A day earlier, Lopez, who ran two online news outlets in the southern state of, I can't even pronounce that, but it's Oaxaca, had posted a Facebook article accusing local lawmaker Armedia Espinoza Cartas of engaging in corruption in connection with her bid for re-election. And this goes to the point where I was saying there's elected leaders, or at least people running for office, who are believed, or I guess you can assume, are sort of involved in some of these murders. He lay dead when a nearby police car responded to an emergency call, stopped the pickup, and arrested the two men. One of them turned out to be, Espinoza, the politician in Lopez's account. Espinoza has not been on trial in relation to the murder of Lopez. She declined to comment, and we were unable to discover any prior statements she made about her involvement in the corruption or Lopez account. Both the other men and her brother are still in custody, but not yet been put on trial. Just amazing. So I think that might, again, everybody, I literally have more articles that I can toss up here. Maybe I'll end with this one. Yeah, I think I'll end with this one here. This one is from Al Jazeera, we're just answering the broader question. It's not specifically on a particular person, but why are so many journalists being killed in Mexico? And like I said, this is from Al Jazeera. Why are so many journalists being killed in Mexico? Let's just read the summary on this one. Mexico is one of the most dangerous places for journalists in the world. The country experienced a record number of journalist deaths in 2022. Criminal cartels and corruption have plagued the country for decades, continuing a cycle of violence. Even with some efforts to protect the press, the fact remains that journalists in Mexico are facing undeniable threats to their lives and livelihoods. What is this showing? This is just some other fun facts here about it. We won't go through another video just for time's sake, so we can hit all the topics today. But final word on this topic. This is just a ominous warning of what capitalist reactionary forces are willing to do if you call out their corruption, if you put in jeopardy their corrupt money flow, money flow. And it's pretty sad to see people who are just trying to help the average person understand what's going on with their government, with their, whoever politicians, whatever they're reporting on with the drug situation. Nothing sacred.